Good evening. Welcome to any visitors. Welcome to those streaming along online with us. If we have any visitors tonight, my name is Charles Plemons, and this is a study of Proverbs. And I have the Section 8 handout, if anybody needs a copy of that. There you are. Anybody else? Take one, all right. All right, so we have been studying in Proverbs the use of the tongue. And we've been talking about a lot of the sinful uses, the things that people do that leads them into trouble by the way they use their tongue, the way they use their mouth. Really, we're talking about the way they use their speech. And just a little bit of review. I know we had VBS last week, so it's been a while since we've looked at this. So on the screen here, we've got the ones that we've talked about already. So the first one was the idea of talking too much, the idea of the idle talk, the idle chatter. You know, you're talking instead of doing what you are supposed to be doing. Now, this does not mean if you are a talkative person, you are a sinful person. This is talking about doing something that is avoiding what you're supposed to do because you're doing something else. Whispering and tale-bearing. This goes back to the idea of gossiping that keeps coming up in Proverbs over and over and over again. We talk about all the different problems that causes for ourselves, for each other, for our communities, for our church. There's all kinds of bad things that occur because of that. Then we went into the concept of lying. So many times we get ourselves in trouble because we, instead of using truth, we use our mouths, our tongues to utter lies. And along with that, we talked about this idea of insincere flattery. So that is a specific form of lying. So we're not talking about complimenting. Complimenting somebody is good. If you encourage them, if you lift them up, if you mean this, complimenting is good. Flattery, though, is the idea that it is either insincere or has some kind of ulterior motive. So you are giving the praise, giving the compliments with the idea that it's going to earn something for you. Then we talked about angry words, all of the problems that happen in society because in that moment of anger, we just let our mouths go. And we talked about, just that idea, that old idea of, take a minute and count to 10. How many things might we avoid if we just actually took that pause rather than just blurt out whatever comes to mind. So that gets us caught up on what we've talked about so far. And there are a few more that we want to bring up. So the next one is biting or sarcastic speech. Sarcasm. When you're a teenager, I think you try to get a black belt in sarcasm. I know I did. And, that's often the experience. You end up talking to somebody and just everything, it's the eye roll, it's the innuendo with things that are being said. And I know that I tried to perfect this as a youth. Some people never grow out of that. Some people continue to perfect it on into adulthood. But this is really a problem. So this is when we are using our words, using our speech, and we're cutting down other people, we're cutting down other ideas, and we're trying to, through clever turn of phrase, make other people seem foolish or stupid or belittle them in some way. Turn with me to Proverbs 12 and verse 18. Proverbs 12, 18. And I like the way this is worded because this really encapsulates sarcasm. It says, "There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health." I labeled this biting speech. You could also call it cutting speech, piercing speech. That's what this is referring to here, this idea of our words just cutting into people or undercutting people, cutting them down, and using our words to make them feel lesser. But it gives us the opposite here. It says the tongue of the wise does what? It promotes what? Health. Well, that's the opposite. So what does the piercing do? What does that promote? Unhealth. Yeah, unhealthiness. It tears up relationships. It tears up that person's self-worth, their self-esteem. It can tear up their faith. It can have all kinds of impacts in their lives when we react to things in a sarcastic manner, in that belittling manner. Nobody truly likes being cut down with sarcasm. Now, a lot of times you hear somebody say something and other people snicker, they laugh, they find it funny, and that's all well and good when it's somebody else, right? Well, what did we just hear about? This idea of loving our neighbor as ourselves. If somebody is cutting down someone else, we should react to that with the idea of they're cutting down me. But a lot of times that's not the way that we behave. So we see here that this kind of speech, this kind of use of our mouth is an unhealthy thing. It hurts us. It causes problems.
Well, I think it also kind of implies rashness. In other words, people with stabbing sword, that makes people just rash. They don't think.
Mm-hmm. Could be. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Now, I know some people that are extremely sarcastic, but they are razor sharp, quick-witted. Like it's not rashness. Like they think about it, and man, can they cut you? You know. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So I think there's two sides of that. I think there are the people who do it just kind of like that idea of the angriness. You know, you're angry and you say something that you don't mean. You know, that rashness can make you say something biting or sarcastic. Some people, though, it's very deliberate. It's very thought out, and they can be good at it. What was that? They're professionals. Yeah, right. Yeah, they started young and grew into it. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a serious thing. God is warning us here the problems of cutting each other down, cutting into each other. It's an unhealthy thing. The tongue of the wise promotes health. Any other thoughts on sarcasm? That's one I don't think we talk about a lot as, being warned about.
We forget when we want to cut people down to size, we're not placing ourselves very high on the totem pole either.
Yeah. Yeah, as he was doing the devotional, I got this image in my mind. I kind of got myself tickled because I thought, how many times do you go to these seminar kind of things where, you're supposed to learning to deal with difficult people kind of thing, and you're sitting there and you're taking notes and you've always got somebody in mind. And then I kind of pictured God sitting in the audience with somebody talking about dealing with difficult people and him taking notes on dealing with me. That's the way we need to think about it sometimes. We have all these people in our minds of, these are difficult folks. From God's perspective, I'm a pretty difficult person. I don't behave like I should all the time. I keep on doing the wrong things. I keep saying the wrong things. God has to deal with a difficult person, at least one. I know.
We also have to keep in mind the growing number of people who do not understand sarcasm.
Sure.
Sarcasm, a lot of us assume, that was sarcasm. But there is a growing number of people that sarcasm doesn't make sense to.
Yeah, and so there's people who have language barriers. There's people who have comprehension barriers on this. There are people who take things extremely literally and don't understand that it's sarcasm. Absolutely, that's a problem.
Charles,
Yes, sir.
how would we define sarcasm? Because I would argue there's a few places Jesus uses it.
Sure, he could. Yeah, there are a few places. I agree with that. What I'm talking about is this idea of intentionally trying to hurt, undermine, cut down for a negative purpose. The examples that I believe you probably have in mind are where he is pointing out to them like flaws in logic. They have made a statement and he is using a statement that kind of, if they stop and think about it, oh, hey, this is a learning opportunity. I don't think most of the time, at least not when I use sarcasm, I'm not using it as a learning opportunity. I'm trying to get the snicker or the laugh or that kind of thing. Did that answer that at all? Sure. Any follow-up thought on that? Yeah, yeah.
When they're trying to stone him, he says, "Which good work are you trying to stone me for?"
Sure, right. Yeah, and we talked about, just because something can't be sinful doesn't mean it's always sinful. Anger, for example. Jesus was angry. He drove people out of the temple. How many times do we read about God's wrath? What is wrath? Anger. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. But again, there's a teaching point of that. We're talking about the ridiculous to drive home the point of the obvious. It should be obvious, but you make it in this way that makes people stop and think about it. All right, good thoughts. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I think my version says reckless. Reckless words.
Reckless words?
Pierce like a sword, but the tongue is the wise thing to keep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thrown out and not thought about like that was on my
Yeah, absolutely. And how many things are said in sarcasm where it is reckless? You say something that, it gets people stirred up, it gets them angered, it gets them feelings hurt. It's a reckless way to go about, controlling your speech. So I think that's another good term for it. Absolutely. What else? Y'all are talkative tonight. I like this. All right. Let's go on to number 7 then. Number 7, profanity and filth. Profanity and filth. Do we think God has anything to say about this ever? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. All right, so we've already seen several times in Proverbs, how we're supposed to govern our words, govern our thoughts. So we're going to pull a couple of other examples. We're going to look a little bit in the Old Testament, a little bit in the New. So this idea of profanity and filth, we're also going to lump under here the idea of using the Lord's name in vain. So let's turn way back to Exodus 20 and verse 7. Exodus 20 and verse 7. It says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." All right, so even though this is under the profanity and filth category, I'm not saying the name of God is filthy, okay? Don't take that. And when I say profane, the idea of we are profaning God when we take his name in vain, not that his name is profane. Does that make sense? Is that clear? So why is it a problem to take God's name in vain, other than the fact that he says don't do it? What's the problem with that? Why not do it?
Disrespecting God himself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. God is the most holy, the most revered. That should be the absolute epitome of what we hold dear and love, cherish, and respect. I love that term, respect. Again, going back to our devotional tonight, ties in great, wonderful. What's the first commandment, the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God. And so he's telling us, if you love God, you're not going to take the name of God in vain. How often do we hear this kind of thing in society? All the time. All the time. Every day. Yeah. And we've also, kind of related to this, we have this tendency to try to still get a negative, but make it sound better, kind of a euphemism kind of thing. How many times do we hear somebody say holy and then some other word? Now, there's a whole slew of words, but usually the word that is following holy is not holy. And it could be, there's dozens of words come to my mind, but how often do we hear that? Holy this, holy that, holy? It doesn't even make sense when you stop and think about it. What are we saying? This thing that I'm about to utter is holy. What does it mean to be holy? We have no idea. All right, that's great. Holy. So it's reserved for God. It's from God. It is pure. It is sinless. It is righteous. And yet we put that as the attribute in front of awful things. I think that's related to this idea of taking the name of God in vain. We're taking the concept, what's more holy than God? God is the source of holiness, of righteousness. We are taking the essence of God and applying it to something very earthly that is certainly not holy. And yet, we don't even think about it. It's permeated so much into our society and our way of speech. I think of The Simpsons. How many times does Bart Simpson utter, holy this, holy that? It's on every t-shirt, But I think we do that and we don't stop and think about what am I really saying when I do that? So I think that's related to this. And what is what?
Just people uttering the Lord's name with profanity.
Yeah. Well, and also, isn't that an extension of an oath or a curse? How many times we talk about the big one, right? GD. That's what everybody. What is that? That is God sealed the deal of cursing, profaning this very thing. I think there's an idea there of a covenant or pact or curse, calling down the power of God. And that's just spread to where we use God's name in front of all kinds of things, holiness in front of all kinds of things. And we just don't think about it. We've lost the holiness of our concept of God.
It takes you back so far to how pious Jews felt about God's name.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sacred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is it to us? It should be, but do we behave that way? And us as a society. And so we have an obligation, I believe, to think about these things and try to curb our speech so that we do have that positive influence on the people around us. We should have a markedly different way of communicating than the world around us. And I hope every single one of us, me included, the next time you start to say holy whatever, and it doesn't have to be a curse word, it's just whatever, is that what you really mean? Is that what you really want to say? Is that what you want the people around you who may not even be Christian to think, well, here's a Christian who thinks this is holiness? That's the point. We want to reserve the idea of God's purity and righteousness and holiness for things that truly are.
Kind of lumped it in with idle words now, just saying out loud. Like they
Yeah.
say, it's an idle word. They're not even, it's a throwaway word.
Yeah.
They're not really even thinking of God.
Yeah.
It's just something to say.
Yeah.
So you think about the verse about idle words.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's kind of lumped into that.
Yeah. We like pause words. And when we hear news, we've for many people, we've replaced God's name or the term God with other words that really goes back to the same thing. Oh my goodness. Well, where did that come from? Because people were trying to stop saying, oh my God. But that's a throwaway term, right? Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. What does that even mean? What does gosh mean? We use it like a term of astonishment, but we're not really communicating a whole lot with that. We're pausing. Oh my goodness, oh my gosh. And there's so many things that we say that we have taken, oh, well, I know I shouldn't do this, so let's soften it up a little bit, and it's crept into our language. It is. It really is. It truly is. Right.
And it's hard because we are inundated with this in society from all angles.
Right.
And it will creep into your language also at times. It will.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it's so hard.
Yeah. And again, I just want to plant this idea in our minds so that when it does creep in, maybe you'll have that thought of, I didn't really mean to say that. That's not really what I meant. That is not holy. Or why am I saying, these things? Stop and pause. The only way that we can change our behavior, to start with, we've got to be aware of our behavior. We've got to understand what we're doing, where it comes from, and why it might be a negative. Right, it's just words. Just words. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. And yet we've talked about how we're going to be held accountable for every word. Every single thing we've uttered, God has heard. We've never whispered something that God didn't hear us say.
I've heard that the Qumran community in southern Judea, people visited there when I was there some years ago. They had a long room in which the archaeologists found many inkwells and lots of pens.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they were copying the law and other books in there. And it was said that when the scribes would come to the name of God, they would stop, and there's a big book just right next to it. They go dip themselves in the middle and come back and copy the name of God, and then go on.
Yeah, I've heard that too. So if you were in the back and you couldn't hear that, he's talking about how there were these scribes that they would be copying the word of God. When they got to the name of God, they would pause and they would purify themselves basically before they would even write down the name. And yet we throw these terms around left and right. And again, part of society, we're brought up in this. It's everywhere around us. But we are called to be different from society. All right, anything else on that one? Great discussion. All right. It's hypocritical to use our speech to both bless and curse. James 3, verse 10. So turn way over. You were in Exodus, now go way ahead. James 3, verse 10. It says, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. What is the impact to the non-believer who hears us talking 1 minute about our faith and the blessings of God, and we're trying to bless others, and we're talking up the faith, and then we turn around and we are cursing. Now, cursing, we could talk about foul speech, or we could talk about just the idea of tearing others down, negative kind of speech. You've got positive and negative coming out of the same mouth. We again are called to be different from the world. What message are we sending when we say, here's what we believe, and then we turn around and out of the same mouth, we're behaving like everybody else? That's the problem. That's why it's hypocritical. Now, it's also a problem for us because we're supposed to change our behavior. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. We're supposed to love God above all things. We're supposed to be uttering good things, blessings, positive things. Every time we backslide and we're uttering curses and tearing down and we have filthy speech and language, we are stepping right back into the world. We're right back where we were trying to climb out of. And so he's warning us here. It shouldn't be so. Don't do both. It's detrimental to you. It's detrimental to society, especially the non-believers, those who we're trying to show there is a better way. There's a good way. There's a holy way. There's a righteous way. And yet we turn around and as soon as we say, oh, I believe this wonderful thing about God, and then we're right back to the negative speech. It's a warning. Yes, sir.
James 3:10, of course, you've noted that. But another verse that's similar to that is it shows what's in our heart.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah.
So what comes out here is what's up here.
Yeah. Right. So if we have these curses coming out, and again, you can take that to mean, literally curse words, foul language, profanity, filthy words, or it can be cursing other people, tearing other people down. If that's coming out, where's it coming from? Like you said, from the heart, from our mind.
I'll shut up after this.
Please don't.
Of our children hearing all this
Mm-hmm.
all the time, this constantly, and it gets up here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a hard thing to, once it's there, it's a hard thing to get out.
Yeah. Yeah, so our children are overhearing the things that we say. They're hearing the things that are being said in society. And as he said, once it takes root, once you hear it, that seed's planted. We're influenced by the society around us. The words that we hear, the way people behave, the way people say things, the things people say about others. Absolutely. But we know that we influence others. If negative can influence, how much can positive influence? If we focus on being that positive and trying to be the influence, it will matter. Now, will you see it immediately? Probably not. But that's the whole concept behind watering seeds of faith. You changing your behavior, you changing your behavior, you changing yours, me changing mine. All that has a cumulative effect on ourselves and everybody around us.
And along those lines, I've heard
Yeah.
Just like you said, God looks at the heart. He hears our word, listens to our heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that should be a terrifying thing for us as well. We've never gotten away with saying anything. We've also never gotten away with thinking it. And we can be insincere in our speech, and we can fool others. We will never, one time, any time, ever fool God.
It's kind of nice that even in front of a Christian mind, the Spirit intercedes for us. And we can't utter the perfect words.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's in our heart
Yeah,
that we don't express.
yeah,
So the Holy Spirit will help us
yeah,
with that.
absolutely. Wonderful point. All right. Going along with this similar idea, coarse jesting and foolish talking. Coarse jesting and foolish talking. Have you ever noticed that when a TV show comes on and it says for mature audiences only, often it's going to be the most immature thing that possibly could be to follow? Isn't that ironic? For mature audiences only.
I wouldn't know.
You would know. Good, Miller. Keep it that way. Excellent. Good. Everybody give Miller a round of applause. And then go back to lying and listen. Turn to Ephesians 5, verse 4. Ephesians 5, verse 4. It says, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving up. And we're going to stop right there at the end of this one. I want to see this list here. Filthiness, foolish talking, coarse jesting, things that are not fitting for the speech of Christians. So filthiness, that's pretty clear. We understand what that is. That's going to be the profane words or talking about things in a perverse manner. Just every single one of us can imagine the things we've heard, probably even just today. If you don't know what I'm talking about, turn on your TV. It won't take long. Turn on your radio. Walk down the street. Walk through Walmart. You are going to hear filthiness in some way. Foolish talking. What is foolish talking? Blabbering, okay, it could be that idle chatter. It could be, if we were talking about foolishness being the opposite of wise, and wise being the person who's pursuing God, and then foolish being the one who is not. Foolish talking would just be talking about things that are opposite of what God would have us discussing and talking about. Just things that have nothing to do with holiness, righteousness, our salvation. How many times do we get caught up talking about things that truly are a problem to be talking about? You hear conversations all the time, and at the end of it, you're kind of like, wow, people have really spent time talking this out. There are TV shows that's all they do. I think of some of these sensationalism talk shows that come on. Growing up, what was that guy's name? Donahue Springer was the one I was thinking about. Jerry Springer. Yeah, so here's an idea of some foolish talking, right? You've got 30 minutes or an hour of people who are just talking about uselessness, foolishness in a lot of cases. Just trying to get people riled up. There's nothing productive, righteous, or godly in a lot of the examples that we can bring to mind. Now, that's not to say that there was never anything positive that came out of something. You can probably find some example. But we can stop and think back. Okay, that's an idea of foolish talking. Focusing on things that are completely not godly. Coarse jesting. What is coarse jesting? Yeah, that's exactly what I was wanting somebody to say. It's this idea of we are making jokes and comments about things that should be righteous, but we have gone with the unholy aspects of it. Fornication and adultery. We make sexual jokes. God is not against sex. God invented sex. God put it in place for man and woman who are married. But we tell these jokes that get people snickering and laughing, and we've perverted that. We've taken the holiness out of it. That's coarse jesting. This idea of making light or making dirty or making filthy of something in society for the idea of amusement. How many comedians are rich because of just this right here? There's a starving community for this kind of thing. People want to be fed this. So we shouldn't be involved in it. We shouldn't be participating. We shouldn't be saying it. We should not be laughing at it. It doesn't matter if you're not the one who said the joke. If somebody said it and you're over there laughing, you're encouraging them to say the joke. And if you're the one who's laughing at it, again, what does that say to the non-believer beside you who looks over and says, well, last night they were at church, and today, man, did you see how hard they were laughing at that utterly filthy joke? It's a dangerous, dangerous, slippery thing. But we're inundated in this society where this stuff is all around us. So again, we are called out to be different than this. But again, we've got to stop and pause, and we've got to be aware. And so again, I just want us to think, the next time something like this comes up, stop, think. What is the behavior God would want from me right now in this moment? Any other thoughts? Yeah, there's so many different ways that we can react. Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Right. All right, so we've talked and talked and talked about all of these negatives of the fact that we have mouths. Does anything good come from the fact that we have mouths? Well, actually, yes. Proverbs has some things to say about that. So we focused on negative, but we want to be positive people. There are proper uses of the tongue. There are proper ways that we should use our speech and our words. And we can use our words in a righteous manner, in a positive manner. And that should be one of our goals. That should be one of the things that we think about and try to do. So, first of all, and we talked about this just momentarily ago, the idea of calm anger. And that's kind of related to what you just brought up a second ago, the idea of, calmly and collectedly walking away. We should be able to have calm emotions. So, we want to be able to also diffuse situations instead of stirring people up. We want to calm people down. If we are mad, we want to behave in a righteous manner. If other people are mad, we want to get them to control themselves and end up in righteous behavior. So Proverbs 15, verse 1. So we're finally back to Proverbs. Proverbs 15 and verse 1. It says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. Now, we read this a couple of weeks ago, the idea of the soft answer. So we can calm the situation down by having soft words, polite words. You can see a fight starting. I think about growing up with kids. You have one child insults another, and then the other one turns around and they throw an insult back. And you just see it instantly escalating, right? You know, the insults get worse and worse and worse. And then before long, they're not throwing insults anymore. They're throwing each other. Punches, kicks, clawing, biting, whatever. Now, remember how we said that some people start with sarcasm early and they never grow out of it? Well, some people never grow out of the throwing and the kicking and the punching. We see these things escalate. We know words stir people up. Our words should be calming. Our words should be able to diffuse situations. Now, that's not to say we should never try to get people emotionally charged. When Jesus threw the moneylenders out of the temple, was he trying to diffuse the situation with the moneylenders? No, certainly not. He was driving them out of the temple. But how many times did people come to him with some kind of challenge or some kind of question, and they had this ulterior motive, and the answer that he gave just it cut the wind right out of their sails? We can be the same way. We don't have to react with provocation, with anger. We can have that calm influence. We should have the soft answer whenever possible. And that, for many of us, me included, me especially, because I've told you, I have a very short temper. It's not the natural inclination. You know, you want to bite back. You want to get riled up. That soft answer, that's what we're told to do. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
The phrase I hear so often is, I just tell it like it is.
Yeah.
As if it's a point of pride that they speak in harsh and blunt terms.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of speaking is to communicate. And how you communicate. You can, you're trying to get across something, sometimes being harsh and blunt isn't really the best approach.
Yeah. Yeah, so we alluded to this earlier. Our society is very, very good at taking a negative thing and giving it a softer name and trying to convince you that it's no longer a negative. You know, so that whole idea, you know, anger, oh, yeah, we don't like people to be angry, but just speaking my truth, telling it like it is, telling you straight up. Well, that's a great thing, right? But what's the difference between the behavior of the two? Often not any.
We got to get rid of the idea of speaking my truth. Right? There is no my truth, your truth, or a truth. Mm-hmm. There is the.
Yeah, there is truth. Absolutely.
I'm always amazed at police officers, how they're able to diffuse situations and remain calm when they're being disrespected so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm good friends.
And that takes training.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm good friends with our county jailer, and some of the tales that he tells me of the things people do and say, I'm like, I can't imagine how you kept your cool in some of those scenarios. I mean, it just blows my mind that somebody could be so calm and collected with some of the things that go on. It's unreal.
Society of brashness, we as Christians, I think the soft answer to me implies humility, humbleness.
Right. Yeah. Now, and a soft answer does not mean a dumbed down answer. A soft answer does not mean that we try to shy around the truth. A soft answer means that we deliver the truth in a manner that is not intentionally confrontational, knowing we're going to stir people up. Now, sometimes we have to tell people the truth, and their reaction is going to be anger, but there is a difference between how I can deliver that truth. I can get up and wave in their face and shake my finger and deliver the truth in a very confrontational, angry manner, or a manner that I know is going to cause problems, or I can deliver that truth in a very loving manner. Yes, sir.
I think sometimes pride comes into this. Somebody says something that might be a put down, aren't going to be put down. So you got to say something to cut back at the other guy. And if you just take it and not be proud about how you look, then it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Pride gets us stirred up. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we see that idea of, who's the big dog. We don't want to be cut down. We want respect. We don't want to be disrespected. How many people do you hear about they got in fights because, they disrespected me? My goodness. All right, so we're going to wrap up there, and next week we'll finish up talking about good, positive uses of our mouths.